John had always dreamed of living in a quiet neighborhood. After years of struggling in a cramped city apartment, filled with the noise of traffic, loud neighbors, and constant stress, he finally bought a small house in a suburban community. It wasn't the biggest house on the block, nor the most beautiful, but to John, it was perfect. The lawn was modest, the trees along the street swayed gently in the wind, and the evenings were so silent he could hear crickets in the distance. For the first time in a long time, he felt like life was calm. He had worked hard for this. Countless late nights at the office, living frugally, saving every penny. This house was his reward. He often sat on the porch with a cup of tea after work, watching the sun go down behind the rooftops. Sometimes he would close his eyes and just listen to the sound of peace. This was what he wanted. No drama, no chaos, just a life where he could breathe. But in every neighborhood, there was always one person who disrupted the peace. For John, that person was Sandra. She lived 2 houses down and had earned herself the nickname HOA Karen. Everyone in the community knew her reputation. She was the type of person who believed she had authority over everyone else. Her yard was decorated with expensive ornaments. Her Tesla was always polished to a mirror shine, and she walked around like she owned the entire block. John had heard whispers from his neighbors before he even moved in. Stories about Sandra lecturing people on the color of their mailbox, scolding them about where their kids left their bikes, and threatening fines over the smallest details. Most people just stayed out of her way. John, however, was new. At first he thought maybe the neighbors exaggerated. Surely nobody could be that controlling. The first time he met her, she gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice sweet but firm. "I'm Sandra, president of the HOA. If you need anything, let me know, and don't forget, we like to keep our lawns trimmed every Saturday. It's kind of mandatory." John nodded politely, but inside he felt something off. Still, he told himself to let it go. Everyone had their quirks, and he wanted peace, not problems. For a while he managed to ignore her. He worked, came home, and enjoyed his evenings without any real issues. But one day, everything changed. It was late evening when John pulled into his driveway. He noticed something strange. A long, bright orange extension cord stretched across the pavement. It led from his garage outlet all the way to Sandra's Tesla, parked halfway into her driveway. At first he blinked in confusion, wondering if maybe there had been some emergency. But as he got out of his car and followed the cord, he realized exactly what had happened. Sandra was charging her Tesla, using his electricity. His stomach sank. His peace cracked just a little in that moment. Who just walked into someone else's property, plugged into their power, and thought it was fine? John stood there for a moment, feeling anger and disbelief mixed together. He knocked on her door, and after a few moments, Sandra appeared, wearing a smile as though nothing was wrong. "Oh, don't worry," she said before he could even ask. "The HOA board allows shared resources. It's not a big deal. You'll hardly notice it on your bill." Then she gave a little wave and shut the door in his face. John stood there, stunned. He wasn't on any board. Nobody had asked him. There was no agreement, no permission, just entitlement. That night, as he sat on his porch, the tea in his hand tasted bitter. The peace he had worked so hard for suddenly felt fragile. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And deep inside, John knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, John walked out of his house, still thinking about what had happened the night before. He looked down his driveway, and just as he feared, the orange extension cord was still there, snaking across the concrete like some unwanted intruder. The sight of it made his jaw tighten. It wasn't just the electricity that bothered him. It was the arrogance. The way Sandra had brushed him off, as if his home, his effort, and even his bills didn't matter at all. John picked up the cord and carefully unplugged it from his garage outlet. He coiled it neatly, walked it over to Sandra's porch, and placed it there. He thought maybe this quiet action would be enough of a message. Maybe she would realize her mistake and stop. But by the time he returned home that evening, the cord was back. This time her Tesla sat glowing under the streetlight, humming as it charged, and his outlet was once again the source. John felt his blood boil. She hadn't even knocked on his door, hadn't asked, hadn't apologized. She simply took. Taking a deep breath, John decided he needed to face this head-on. He marched up to Sandra's door and knocked firmly. After a pause, the door swung open, and there she stood, holding a glass of wine, looking like she owned the world. "Yes?" she asked, almost annoyed. "Hey, Sandra," John began, trying to keep his tone calm, though his chest burned. "Why is your car plugged into my house again? I thought I made it clear last night." Sandra's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked amused. "Oh, John, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little power. Hardly makes a difference. For someone like you. And as I said, the HOA supports shared resources." "That's not what the HOA is for," John said, his voice tightening. "You don't have the right to take my power without asking. It's my property." Sandra sighed, swirling the wine in her glass like she was bored. "Listen, I'm the president of the HOA. If you have a problem, bring it up at the next meeting. But until then, please don't touch my car or my charging cord again." With that, she closed the door in his face. John stood there, his fists clenching. He wanted to shout, to bang on her door, to tell her she had no authority over him. But instead, he walked away in silence because deep down he knew arguing with someone like her wouldn't solve anything. She lived in her own world, where rules bent around her, where she always won. At the end of the month, John received his electric bill. His heart sank when he saw the number. It was nearly double what he usually paid. His careful budget was already stretched thin, and now he had to pay for someone else's luxury. He sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. For the next few weeks, the same cycle repeated. He would unplug her cord, and she would plug it back in. She became bolder, sometimes even leaving the cord plugged in while he was home, as if daring him to do something about it. Once, he caught her in his yard during the afternoon, casually walking across his driveway with her cord in hand. "Sandra, you can't just walk into my property like this," he snapped. She turned to him with a smug smile. "John, you're new here. You'll learn how things work. It's easier if you just accept it. Everyone else does." And that was the moment John realized something important. This wasn't just about power or money. This was about control. Sandra wanted to make him bend. She wanted to prove that she could take whatever she wanted, and nobody could stop her. That night, John sat in the dark living room, staring out the window at the faint glow of Sandra's charging Tesla. His tea sat untouched on the table. He felt the peace he once loved slipping further away each day. He had bought this house to escape chaos, but instead, he had walked right into a war he didn't want. Yet deep inside, he knew he couldn't just let it go. Because if he did, she would never stop. The tension between John and Sandra grew heavier with each passing day. Every morning, when John stepped outside for work, the first thing he noticed was the orange extension cord lying across his driveway like a bright insult. It wasn't just a cord anymore. It was a symbol of how little Sandra respected him. He tried ignoring it. He tried to keep his peace by telling himself it was just a bit of electricity. But every time he opened his electric bill, every time he saw Sandra smirking as she plugged in her Tesla, his patience thinned. Finally, one evening, he had enough. He was returning home from work, exhausted, when he saw Sandra in his yard once again. She was casually dragging the extension cord across his grass, humming to herself as if she owned the property. Something inside him snapped. He walked up quickly, his voice sharp. "Sandra, stop right there." She looked up, startled. For just a moment, then her smug expression returned. "Oh, John, relax, I'm just plugging in the car. It'll only take a few hours." John's fists clenched at his sides. "You can't keep doing this. This is my house, my outlet. You don't have permission to take my power." Sandra rolled her eyes and straightened her shoulders, her tone dripping with arrogance. "As I told you before, I'm the president of the HOA. What I say is law around here. The community rules allow this kind of arrangement." "No, they don't," John shot back. His voice shook, not from fear but from the weight of holding in his anger for too long. I read the HOA handbook cover to cover. There's nothing about using your neighbor's electricity without asking. This isn't a shared resource, this is theft. Her lips curled into a smirk. You're new here. You don't understand how things work. People don't argue with me, John. If you know what's good for you, you'll just let it go. John took a step closer, his voice lowering. I'm not afraid of you. You don't get to walk into my yard and treat me like a doormat. If you want to charge your car, pay for it yourself. For a moment, the mask slipped. Sandra's eyes flashed with anger. She leaned closer, her voice sharp. Careful. You're forgetting who runs this neighborhood. You think the board will take your side? You're just one man. I'm the one they listen to. John didn't flinch. He looked her in the eyes and said firmly, I don't care if you call yourself president of the universe. This is my property, and I won't let you keep stealing from me. Sandra let out a cold laugh, brushing him off as if he were nothing. You wouldn't dare cross me, nobody does. With that, she plugged the cord in again and walked away, leaving John standing, in his own yard, fuming. That night, John couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words replaying in his mind. You wouldn't dare cross me. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was intimidation. She believed she had complete control over everyone, and she thrived on making people bow to her. The next day, John attended the HOA meeting, determined to bring the issue up publicly. He sat in the small clubhouse with his neighbors, waiting for the right moment. When Sandra called the meeting to order, he raised his hand. I'd like to discuss something important, John said firmly. Sandra has been using my electricity to charge her Tesla without permission. This has raised my bill significantly, and I want it to stop. For a moment, the room went silent. A few neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Sandra, however, didn't even blink. She cut him off with a fake smile. Oh, John, let's not bore everyone with petty personal issues. This is a community meeting, not a place for private squabbles. It's not petty, John insisted, his voice rising. It's theft. It affects me, and it could affect anyone else here if she decides to do the same. But before he could continue, Sandra moved on to the next agenda item, speaking over him as if he weren't there. The other neighbors lowered their eyes too, tired or too afraid to challenge her. By the end of the meeting, John realized the truth. He was on his own. No one was going to stand up to Sandra for him. Walking home that night, his chest felt heavy. He had come to this neighborhood for peace, but instead he found himself in a battle with a woman who thought she was untouchable. Yet even in his frustration, a spark of determination burned inside him. If no one else would stop her, he would. The weeks after the HOA meeting were some of the hardest for John. Every time he thought maybe Sandra had gotten the message, he would come home to find the same thing. Her bright orange cord stretched across his driveway, plugged into his outlet. It was almost like she did it on purpose now, like she wanted to show him that he was powerless against her. At first, John tried small measures. He locked the garage outlet, thinking that would stop her. But the very next evening, she showed up with a longer extension cord and plugged into the outdoor socket near his porch. When he disconnected that, she dragged the cord around to the side of his house as if she were on a scavenger hunt for free electricity. The disrespect was exhausting. John no longer looked forward to coming home. Instead of peace, he was greeted by the sight of Sandra's car feeding off his house. Every time he heard the low hum of her Tesla charging, it felt like a taunt. One night, John decided to confront her again. He stood in his yard as she dragged her cord over. Sandra, this is trespassing, he said, his voice firm. You're walking onto my property without permission. You're stealing from me. Sandra didn't even look ashamed. Instead, she smirked, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh, John, you're making such a big deal out of nothing. You live alone, don't you? You don't even use much power. Be a good neighbor for once. Stop whining. John felt his chest tighten. This isn't being a good neighbor. This is theft. This is disrespect. If you keep doing this, I'll have to call the police. For the first time, her smirk faltered, but only for a second. Then she laughed, shaking her head. The police? Please. Do you think they care about a power cord? Do you think anyone will take your side against me? Everyone here knows who I am. They know better than to fight me. The words cut deeper than John expected. She wasn't just stealing power, she was trying to steal his dignity. She wanted him to feel small, to believe that he was trapped in her control, just like everyone else in the neighborhood. After that confrontation, Sandra grew bolder. She began plugging in even during the day when John was home, daring him to say something. Once, when he unplugged the cord while her Tesla was charging, she stormed into his yard, screaming loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Excuse me, did you just unplug my car?" she shouted, her face red with anger. "Yes, I did," John replied, his voice steady though his hands trembled. "You can't keep using my power." "You have no right," she snapped. "That's harassment. If you keep this up, I'll fine you for violating HOA rules." Neighbors peeked out from their windows, watching the scene unfold, but none of them spoke. They stood in the shadows, too afraid to step in, too tired of Sandra's endless power games. That night, John sat in his kitchen with the lights dimmed, staring at his electric bill again. It was higher than ever. His hands shook as he held the paper. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about control, respect, and principle. He realized that no matter what he did, Sandra wasn't going to stop. She thrived on breaking boundaries, on making people submit. If he gave in now, she would never leave him alone. John closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He remembered why he had bought this house in the first place, for peace, for freedom, for a chance to live without being pushed around. And now that peace was being stolen from him by someone who thought she was untouchable, he whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "This has to end. I won't let her win." And in that quiet moment, the first spark of a plan began to form in his mind. The night after Sandra's loud outburst, John sat alone on his porch, staring at the quiet street. The air was cool, but inside his chest burned a storm. He had tried reasoning with her, tried confronting her, even tried appealing to the HOA. Nothing worked. Sandra wasn't just ignoring him. She was enjoying this power struggle. She believed she was untouchable. John sipped his tea, though it tasted bitter. He thought about the hours he worked to pay his bills, the sacrifices he made to afford this house. Every dollar of electricity mattered, but it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity. He couldn't let her win. He couldn't let her keep stealing from him and laughing about it. For days, the thought gnawed at him. He considered calling the police again, but he knew Sandra was right about one thing. The authorities wouldn't care about a power cord. To them, it would sound petty. He thought about cutting the outlets entirely, but why should he have to destroy parts of his own home just to stop her? This was his property. He should be able to enjoy it without fear of someone taking advantage. That was when another thought came to him. A dangerous one. John worked in IT, but over the years he had picked up a lot more than just computer skills. He knew about circuits, wiring, and what happened when power surged. He knew how delicate machines, especially expensive ones, could be if they were fed the wrong current. A Tesla wasn't just a car, it was a rolling computer with a massive battery. And if someone were careless, if someone decided to steal power without understanding the risks, the consequences could be catastrophic. The idea started as a whisper in his mind, but the more Sandra pushed, the louder it became. If she wanted to treat his house like her personal charging station, then maybe it was time she learned that nothing came free. For a week, John prepared silently. He ordered a few devices online, equipment most people wouldn't even recognize. He set up a special outlet on the side of his house. To anyone passing by, it looked normal. Just another plug, just another point of power. But inside, it was different. It was built to send back a sudden surge if overloaded, a jolt that would fry any system not properly protected. As he worked in his garage late at night, his hands shook. He wasn't a cruel man. He wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed hurting others. But Sandra wasn't giving him a choice. She had taken his peace, his money, and his patience. She had mocked him in front of his neighbors, treating him like a fool. Now it was his turn to show her that she wasn't untouchable. When the outlet was ready, John didn't use it immediately. Instead, he waited. He kept his routine the same, letting her believe she had won. He watched from his window as she dragged her orange cord across his lawn, night after night humming as if she were the queen of the world. He stayed quiet, drinking his tea in silence while inside his heart raced. By the end of the week, Sandra had grown smug. She even bragged in front of a few neighbors about how cheap her Tesla charging costs were. John overheard her once, laughing and saying, "Why would I pay when I can just plug into John's house? He can't do anything about it." Her words hardened his resolve. That evening, after sunset, John swapped the outlet. He moved carefully, almost ritual-like, making sure every wire was secure. When he finished, he stood there for a long moment, staring at the device. His breathing was heavy, his heart pounding in his ears. He wasn't just protecting his home anymore. He was taking a stand. As he closed the garage door and sat back down on his porch, tea in hand, he whispered quietly to himself, "Let's see if you laugh." Tomorrow. For the first time in months, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The next evening felt different. John could sense it in the air, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The sun dipped behind the houses and the street grew quiet. Only the sound of crickets filled the night. John sat on his porch with his tea, his eyes fixed on the driveway, waiting. Sure enough, not long after, he saw Sandra emerge from her house. She was dragging the familiar orange extension cord behind her, her steps confident, her face smug. She didn't even glance at John this time. To her, this had become routine. Her car, his power, her rules. She plugged the cord into the new outlet without hesitation, humming as if nothing could ever go wrong. John's heart pounded in his chest. His fingers tightened around his cup. He told himself to stay calm, to just watch. This was the moment everything would change. Minutes passed. At first, the Tesla hummed normally, its charging lights blinking in steady rhythm. Sandra smiled to herself, walking back toward her porch with a glass of wine in hand. She didn't notice anything unusual. But John knew. He could almost feel the energy building. Then it happened. A sharp crack split the quiet night. Sparks flew from the cord, lighting up the driveway like tiny fireworks. The Tesla's lights flashed wildly, alarms blaring as if the car itself was screaming. Smoke curled from the charging port, the acrid smell of burning plastic filling the air. Sandra screamed, dropping her wine glass as it shattered on the pavement. "No! My car! What's happening?" She ran toward the Tesla, waving her hands, helplessly, but it was too late. The system inside had been fried. The battery, the heart of her precious car, was ruined in seconds. Neighbors began to peek out from their windows, their faces glowing in the flickering light. A few even stepped onto their porches, whispering to one another. Everyone had seen Sandra's arrogance for years, but no one had ever dared to challenge her. And now, for the first time, they were watching her lose. Sandra turned, her face twisted in rage and panic. Her eyes landed on John, still sitting calmly on his porch. "You, what did you do?" she shouted, her voice shrill. John didn't flinch. He placed his cup down slowly and stood, his expression calm, his voice steady. "I didn't do anything, Sandra. You did this to yourself. You stole. And now you've learned what it costs." Her face reddened, her voice breaking as she shouted, again, "This is sabotage. I'll call the police. I'll sue you. You'll regret this." But the neighbors were already murmuring. Some shook their heads. Others smirked quietly. Everyone knew the truth. They had seen her drag that cord across his yard countless times. They had watched her bully, threaten and manipulate for years. Now, they were watching her pay the price. Sandra stomped back to her Tesla, but the car was silent now. The alarms had died. The lights dimmed and the smell of burnt circuits lingered in the air. She kicked the tire in frustration, tears of anger forming in her eyes. John didn't move closer, didn't gloat. He simply turned and walked back inside his house. For the first time in months, he felt a strange peace settle over him. His heart still raced, but it wasn't from fear, it was from release, from the battle was over. Later that night, as the street grew quiet again, John sat by his window, watching the faint smoke rise from Sandra's driveway. He didn't feel guilty. He didn't feel cruel. He felt justified. For too long, she had taken without consequence. Now she finally understood that not everyone would bow to her, and though Sandra would scream and blame him in the days to come, John knew one thing for certain. She would never dare to plug into his house again. For the first time since he moved there, he smiled while drinking his tea. The morning after the surge, the neighborhood was buzzing. News traveled fast in small communities, and Sandra's Tesla fiasco was the talk of the street. Everyone had heard the alarms, seen the smoke, and witnessed her meltdown in the middle of the night. Sandra tried to spin the story in her favor. She stormed door to door, telling anyone who would listen that John had sabotaged her car. She shouted about lawsuits, police, and criminal behavior. But the truth was written on everyone's faces. They didn't believe her. For years, Sandra had ruled the neighborhood through fear. She fined people for having their trash bins out too long. She scolded parents for chalk drawings on sidewalks. She even sent angry letters if someone's lawn was a little too long. The neighbors were tired, and now they had finally seen a crack in her armor. When she called an emergency HOA meeting to rally support, only a few showed up. John sat quietly in the back, sipping water as Sandra ranted at the front. "John is dangerous," she shouted. "He nearly burned down my Tesla. He's a threat to this community. We must fine him, punish him, or even force him out." But instead of applause, there was silence. Then one man stood up, an older neighbor named Frank who had lived there for over 20 years. "Sandra," he said slowly, "we've all watched you take advantage of people for too long. John didn't sabotage you. You sabotaged yourself." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Another neighbor, a young mother, spoke up. "You used his power every night. You laughed about it, we all saw it, and now you want us to feel sorry for you?" Sandra's face went pale. For the first time, she realized the crowd wasn't with her. The vote came quickly. One by one, the board members raised their hands, not to punish John but to remove Sandra from her position as HOA president. It was unanimous. She was stripped of her title, her power, and her control. Sandra stormed out of the room in fury, but John didn't follow. He sat quietly, listening as the neighbors began talking among themselves, voices lighter than he'd ever heard them. For once, there was hope in their tone. The reign of HOA Karen was over. In the weeks that followed, Sandra kept to herself. Her Tesla sat dead in her driveway, a silent monument to her arrogance. She stopped making rounds through the neighborhood, stopped sending letters, stopped pretending she owned the place. Slowly, the community began to breathe again. John, meanwhile, returned to his peaceful routine. He mowed his lawn, sipped tea on his porch, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. Sometimes neighbors stopped by just to thank him quietly. "You stood up to her when no one else could," they'd say. John would only smile and reply, "I just wanted my peace." But deep down, he knew it wasn't only about him. By refusing to bow, he had shown everyone else that Sandra wasn't invincible. He had given the neighborhood its courage back. One evening, as he sat on his porch with his tea, Frank came by and joined him. The two men sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn orange and purple. Finally, Frank chuckled and said, "You know, people will be telling this story for years, about how Sandra lost to the quiet guy with the tea." John laughed softly. "I don't want to be a hero," he said. "I just want to live in peace." Frank nodded. Sometimes, peace needs a little fight to protect it. As the stars began to appear overhead, John felt lighter than he had in months. His house finally felt like home again. Not a battlefield, not a burden, but the safe place he had always dreamed it would be. And though whispers of the incident still floated through the neighborhood, one thing became certain. No one ever dared to mess with John or his outlets again. He had fought for his peace and won.